Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Thomas Avery bought a quiet hilltop cottage by the Pacific, he expected peace. What he got was war. A ruthless HOA, a forged lawsuit, and a sabotage plot later, his dream home became a battleground. And Thomas, he's not backing down. This time, the view is worth the fight. Buying that hilltop cottage overlooking the Pacific felt like the first time in 15 years I could finally breathe. After a lifetime spent building offshore turbines, oil platforms, and wave barriers in every time zone except my own, all I wanted was a home where the wind didn't carry the sound of welding torches or radio chatter. Just waves, seabirds, and silence. That's what I found on a narrow ridge above Monterey Bay. A sun-scorched Spanish-style bungalow from the 1940s, with red tiles faded to dusty rose, an arched veranda, and one hell of a view. The listing made it clear: non-HOA property, zoned R1 coastal residential, and grandfathered in before the adjacent development ever got city approval. I ran the parcel through the county registrar myself. Twice. This land belonged to no one but me. The neighbors down the slope weren't as lucky. Their community, Vista Azul, was one of those HOA-governed coastal clusters with matching mailboxes and monthly newsletters about mailbox violations. Their houses clung to the hillside like overpriced barnacles, lower than mine by at least 20 vertical feet. And while their yards may have been pruned within an inch of their lives, mine offered something theirs didn't. A clean, unobstructed ocean view stretching from Point Lobos to the edge of the world. I bought the place from the surviving nephew of the previous owner, who'd passed away the year prior. The transaction was smooth, clean title, no liens, and tucked in the county record was an old coastal permit from the 70s that still allowed a second-story addition as long as it stayed within updated setback limits. The kind of thing no HOA would ever approve if they had jurisdiction, which, again, they didn't. A month after closing, I filed plans with the county to raise the existing roofline by about 5 feet and build a rooftop viewing room, a small second-floor glass enclosure to serve as my office. Panoramic windows, reinforced beams, solar-tinted glass. My idea of retirement luxury. Permits took 2 weeks. The county signed off. Contractor scheduled. Footings marked. Done. But the day the foundation crew showed up to begin soil prep, a silver BMW convertible pulled up right at the edge of my gravel drive. Out stepped a woman in a sleeveless navy sheath dress, kitten heels not made for inclines, and enough perfume to make the seagulls sneeze. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clippered, clutched like a holy relic. She didn't introduce herself, just shouted uphill, "Excuse me, are you the owner of this property?" I was in work jeans, standing ankle-deep in lumber and survey flags. I wiped my hands on my shirt and walked to the edge of the slope. "Yep, Thomas Avery. Can I help you?" She took off her glasses and gave me the smile of someone who thinks she's speaking to a child about to touch a hot stove. Karen Becker, president of the Vista Azul Homeowners Association. "We need to have a word." I nodded, already regretting not installing a fence. "I've been made aware of your construction plans," she said, emphasizing the word aware like I'd committed a felony. "And I must inform you that what you're doing violates Vista Azul's community view preservation guidelines." I blinked. "I'm not in Vista Azul." She raised a brow. "Your home is clearly part of the coastal ridge corridor that defines our visual harmony. Vista Azul's architectural committee maintains oversight of slope-facing properties, even those technically just beyond the boundary. It's about continuity." I nearly laughed. "Ma'am, this house is 80 years old. It predates your subdivision. It's on an independent parcel zoned outside of your association with no easements, liens, or covenants attached. The county's aware. Everything's legal." Karen stepped forward, now visibly annoyed. "Just because something is legal doesn't make it right. That rooftop addition you've proposed, it will completely block the ocean view from multiple homes, including mine. You have a moral obligation to respect the community aesthetic. Your house is part of our environment, whether you like it or not." I gestured toward the open sky behind me. "I bought this place for that view, not for HOA sermons. If your bylaws reach this far uphill, you'd better have a deed to back it." Karen's lips thinned. "We'll see what the court has to say. You'll be hearing from our counsel shortly." She turned on her heel and started downhill without another word. I stood there, whined off the water brushing past my ears, watching her go. My contractor, who'd been quietly reviewing blueprints nearby, gave me a sideways glance and muttered, "So, she's fun." I just exhaled. Something told me that rooftop view was about to get a lot more expensive. The summons came folded into a thick envelope stamped with an embossed seal that looked more like it belonged to a wine club than a legal institution. It arrived 3 days after Karen's unannounced visit, tucked between my utility bill and a flyer about a local arts festival. For a second, I actually thought it was junk mail, until I saw the words Notice of Civil Complaint and the header Vista Azul Homeowners Association v. Thomas Avery. I read it 3 times, then laughed out loud. My contractor, Luis, glanced up from where he was anchoring a concrete form near the west retaining wall. "Bad news." "Depends," I said, flipping to the second page. "Is it bad news if someone sues you for blocking their bathroom window view of the ocean?" Luis whistled. "That's impressively stupid." The complaint listed 3 demands: immediate cessation of all construction activity, removal of any structures exceeding established visual thresholds, and, this was the kicker, compensatory damages for emotional and psychological distress inflicted upon HOA members whose ocean views were materially altered without consent. The attached exhibit included printed photos of Karen's master bathroom window with red arrows pointing to a barely visible corner of my scaffolding. I had to sit down. According to their claim, my house violated Vista Azul's Community View Preservation Guidelines, specifically Section 7, Paragraph B, Subclause 2. No structure shall materially impede the unobstructed coastal sightline established at the time of original development. The obvious problem? My home wasn't part of their original development. Hell, it was older than their entire subdivision. Worse yet, the complaint wasn't even filed through a proper law firm. The legal representative was some guy named Dennis Elford, listed as a legal consultant with an address matching one of the HOA board members. I Googled him. No California bar number, no record with the state, but plenty of Yelp reviews calling him a nightmare HOA pitbull and not technically a lawyer, but definitely a lawsuit hobbyist. I didn't waste a second. I called the Monterey County Assessor's Office and requested an updated parcel report. They emailed me within the hour. Boundary lines, zoning confirmations, historical tax roll data. My property was definitively outside Vista Azul's jurisdiction by at least 30 feet on the narrow side and over 50 on the long one. Next, I called Jenna Lee. Jenna had been recommended by a former engineering colleague who'd gone through an HOA nightmare in Santa Cruz. She answered on the second ring with a voice like iced coffee, sharp, fast, and energizing. Jenna Lee. "Hi, my name's Thomas Avery. I've got a situation involving a homeowners association trying to sue me over a house that isn't in their HOA. There was a pause. "Oh, one of those," she said, already clicking away on a keyboard. "Tell me everything." I laid it out. The history of the property, the deed, Karen's threats, the bogus complaint, the fake lawyer, the bathroom window. She asked for documents, and I sent them over before we hung up. By that evening, Jenna had already drafted a formal response. It was polite, precise, and lethal. She cited 3 precedents, 2 state statutes, and included a notarized boundary map showing exactly where Vista Azul ended and how far outside my house sat. Then she added a personal favorite, California Civil Code, paragraph 1354, outlining the enforceability limits of HOA covenants. Her closing line read like a guillotine blade, "Should your association or its representatives persist in this extrajudicial harassment, we will seek legal remedies including, but not limited to, declaratory relief, damages, and injunctive protection." We sent the letter certified mail, return receipt requested. I also emailed a digital copy directly to Karen at the HOA's contact email. Less than 2 hours later, I got a reply. "Dear Mr. Avery, your aggressive tone and refusal to comply with reasonable community standards are duly noted. We will proceed through the appropriate legal channels. Sincerely, Karen Becker, President, Vista Azul HOA." She signed it with a digital signature that included her title and the Vista Azul logo, a little blue wave curling over a gold sun. I poured myself a bourbon and sat on the back veranda, looking out at the scaffolding as it caught the amber light of sunset. My future office would sit right where the ridge began to fall away, offering a direct view of the ocean and, apparently, a direct line of sight into Karen's fragile ego. Luis came up the steps, wiping his hands on a rag. "You look like you just read something nasty." I handed him the letter. He read it, smirked, then whistled low. "You weren't kidding. They really think they own the sky." "Let's find out how much of it they can afford in court," I said. Walking into the Monterey Superior Courthouse that morning felt like stepping onto a stage in a farce I didn't audition for. The building itself was all glass and sandstone, a modern attempt at looking dignified, but inside it smelled like overcooked coffee and stale bureaucracy. Jenna walked beside me, heels tapping with the kind of confidence that suggested she'd already won, and now we just had to collect the trophy. She carried a slim briefcase filled with documents that, in her words, would bury this HOA circus so deep even the seagulls won't find it. I tried to match her mood, but the knot in my stomach didn't quite loosen. The Vista Azul crowd was already gathered in the hallway outside the assigned courtroom, mostly retirees in pastel sweaters, clutching reusable water bottles as if hydration could ward off accountability. And there, in the center of this nervous flock, stood Karen Becker, dressed in a snowy white blazer suit that screamed, "I mean business. And also, I want you to notice I mean business." She looked at me, the way a person looks at an ant carrying a crumb, curious, annoyed, and offended by the audacity. My eyes drifted to the man standing behind her, a rail-thin guy in a rumpled suit and scuffed shoes. Dennis Elford, the legal consultant she'd hired. He was scrolling on his phone with one finger, muttering to himself, completely ignoring the fact that we were minutes away from a hearing. When the bailiff finally opened the courtroom doors, we filed inside. Jenna motioned for me to sit while she arranged our stack of exhibits on the counsel table. She worked with laser precision, placing documents in perfect order. Meanwhile, Dennis spilled half his papers on the floor and spent a full minute chasing an errant page under the table. Classy. The judge took the bench, a stern, silver-haired woman with a gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. She asked for the parties to identify themselves, and Dennis sprang to his feet, chest puffed like a pigeon, trying to look intimidating. "Your Honor, I represent Vista Azul Homeowners Association," he declared. Jenna rose with the kind of grace that always precedes a knockout. "Jenna Lee, attorney for the defendant, Mr. Thomas Avery." The judge nodded, then said, "Let us begin." Dennis opened with a speech that sounded like he had swallowed a thesaurus and gotten indigestion. He lectured about community harmony and visual continuity and century-old sightlines established by Vista Azul residents, despite the fact that their development was barely 20 years old. He even cited something he called a coastal heritage tradition, which, to my knowledge, did not exist outside his imagination. Then it happened. Dennis produced a folder and announced in an overly dramatic tone, "Your Honor, I present the resolution of our community vote, signed by 17 members of Vista Azul, unanimously declaring Mr. Avery's construction a blight upon our cherished coastline." He handed the stack to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Jenna's eyebrow twitched ever so slightly, her version of an alarm siren. I leaned over and whispered, "What's wrong?" She murmured, "Watch." The judge scanned the pages, lips thinning. "Mr. Elford, these signatures. When was this vote held?" "On April 12th, Dennis replied confidently. Jenna stood. "Your Honor, may we review the signatures under cross?" "Proceed," the judge said. Jenna stepped to the podium, flipping through the pages. "What is the name of this first signatory?" "Donna Morales," Dennis said. "And the second?" "Richard Chalmers." "And the third?" "Edwin Miles." Jenna paused. "Edwin Miles, is that correct?" Dennis nodded proudly. Jenna lifted her gaze to the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Edwin Miles passed away 6 months ago. His obituary is public record." A ripple went through the courtroom. Karen stiffened. Jenna continued, "And this signature here belongs to a Mr. Chalmers. According to county voting records, he moved to Arizona last year. And the next 3 names belong to residents who have sworn affidavits stating they never attended any such vote." The judge slowly turned her head toward Dennis with an expression usually reserved for toddlers caught drawing on the walls. "Mr. Elford, explain." Dennis stammered, sweating through his cheap suit. I was provided these signatures by the HOA board. I assumed they were authentic." "Assumed," the judge repeated. "You submitted potentially fraudulent documents to this court based on assumption." Karen rose, suddenly defiant. "Your Honor, our community follows an honor system. Those signatures reflect our community's wishes. We do not need to prove every detail when protecting our coastal vista." The judge cut her off with a raised hand. "Mrs. Becker, sit down. Now." Karen sat. For the first time, there was genuine fear in her eyes, though she tried to hide it under a rigid jawline. Jenna seized the moment. "Your Honor, I move that the plaintiff's claim be dismissed for lack of legal standing and for submission of unverified, potentially falsified documents. Furthermore, I request the court order an investigation into these materials." Dennis opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The judge looked between us, then spoke, voice low and authoritative. "Motion taken under advisement. I will require a forensic review of these signatures." She turned to Karen. "And Mrs. Becker, I strongly advise you to secure proper counsel going forward. You are entering dangerous territory." A silence fell so thick I could hear Dennis swallowing his own dignity. When the session adjourned, Jenna gathered our documents, her face unreadable. As we exited the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Karen gripping her handbag with white-knuckled desperation. She watched me pass, eyes burning with a mix of outrage and humiliation, and hissed under her breath, "This isn't over." I stopped just long enough to meet her gaze and replied quietly, "No, it's just beginning." We tried to treat the construction like work and not a war. For the first week, that mostly meant showing up, pouring concrete, bolting steel, and avoiding the urge to stand on a ladder and shout legalese at anyone who wandered past with binoculars. My crew, Luis, Marco, and Sarah, moved like a small, well-oiled machine, and I slipped back into the role I knew best, solving problems with measurements and muscle instead of melodrama. Then, on a damp Thursday morning, the sort of gray Pacific fog that makes everything smell like salt and old rope, Marco came running up the driveway with his phone out and an expression that looked like somebody had stolen his toolbox and his dignity. "Boss, you better come see this," he said, breathless. We walked to the staging area where the portable concrete mixer sat idling between piles of rebar. The power cord hung limp, its copper guts exposed where someone had neatly sliced through it with, what I could tell at a glance, an industrial utility knife. Nearby, the scaffolding on the southern face had a lower diagonal brace loosened, so the whole run had a dangerous wobble. Someone had unbolted a half-dozen couplers. It was sloppy enough to be obvious, but precise enough to be effective. Anyone standing on those planks had been a few minutes away from a fall that would have rearranged a life. My stomach turned over. Sabotage has a vocabulary of its own, and I knew it. After 15 years fixing things that people had designed to fail, you learn to read intentionality in torn wires and sheared bolts. This was no prank. This was escalation. This was someone deliberately trying to stop us by making the site unsafe. I asked Marco if the site security cameras had recorded anything overnight. He tapped his screen and handed me the feed. There, in the blue-gray pre-dawn, a silhouette moved like a ghost along the perimeter, pausing at the mixer and then at the scaffold. The camera's timestamp flicked, 2:03 a.m., and the figure wore a baseball cap with an embroidered wave and the letters Vista Azul. The profile was hunched, quick, confident. The man lifted a tool to the cable and made a clean cut. "Jesus," Luis muttered. "That's their logo." My first impulse was old engineering reflex. Document everything. Secure the scene. Do not touch anything that could be evidence. I put on nitrile gloves because chain of custody is not drama, and photographed the cable, the couplers, the cut pattern. I logged it into my site sheet. Then I did what any sane person would do in that situation. I called Jenna. She answered on the third ring. "Tell me you didn't just find prank graffiti." "It's worse," I said. "They sabotaged the equipment. We have video." "Get everything off the ground and lock the site down," she ordered. "Do not confront anyone. I want a police report before anything else. And Thomas, don't let that video leave your phone." I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. The dispatcher sent 2 deputies within the hour, and I watched the color of the morning change from fog to focused business. Deputy Rivera took photos, bagged the cut cable in an evidence envelope, and asked the kind of calm, direct questions that make you feel both complicated and safe. He handled the camera's hard drives with gloved hands and a practiced respect for metadata. We gave statements. Jenna sent an email to the sheriff's office outlining the history, threats, the bogus suit, and asked for expedited review. Within 48 hours, the break-in unit had a lead. The footage, enhanced by the electronics tech at the county, produced a clearer face beneath the cap. It was a weathered, middle-aged face, not unfamiliar to me now that I knew the players in Vista Azul. The county detective called it a positive ID. Harry Dunn, vice president of the HOA. Harry was one of the more outspoken men I'd seen at the earlier meeting, the guy who liked to reference legacy values and smelled faintly of aftershave and self-importance. He'd been photographed at several HOA functions. Now he appeared in my video at 2 in the morning with a pair of wire cutters. The arrest warrant came the next day. I watched the deputy pinched between protocol and the very human desire to make something bad stop. They caught Harry on his own property, 4 houses down, packing a gym bag into the trunk of his Subaru. When they approached, he tried the old "I'm inspecting the hill" routine. "I wanted to check for erosion," he said, hands out. But his sneakers had concrete dust on the soles. His hands smelled like oil. His phone had the same time-stamped messages the police had already pulled from a witness's feed. "Go tonight. She's alone. Do not get seen." The witness, a nervous landscaper who did occasional work for Vista Azul, had come forward after seeing the footage on local social media and recognizing the cap. The booking report listed charges for criminal trespass, vandalism, and for interfering with a construction operation. California has an entire code for making sure people don't sabotage work intended to meet safety standards. Harry protested, but the deputies were precise and unemotional, the way law enforcement has to be when it is separating neighbors instead of fighting fires. There was no heroic shouting, no dramatic cuffs, just the quiet thump of procedure and the soft click of a radio. After Harry's arrest, things shifted from nasty to ugly. Karen posted an indignant statement on the HOA board page, veiled language about righteous oversight and how the community would not be intimidated by outsiders. I screenshot everything. Jenna filed an immediate emergency motion requesting a temporary restraining order preventing any member of Vista Azul from approaching my property. The judge granted it that same afternoon, citing risk to safety and credible evidence of tampering. It was a short, sharp administrative victory. Harry's arrest and the TRO together bought us breathing room to reinforce the scaffolding and continue work under police supervision. Still, I could not shake the feeling that the sabotage had been more than a single man's desperate lunge. Someone had to have encouraged or at least egged Harry on. The messages on his phone, brief, clipped using a tone that read like command more than suggestion, blinked in my mind with the same shrillness as the warning bells on a malfunctioning panel. The prosecutor's office asked to see the evidence. Jenna compiled our filings and added the new charges: attempted sabotage, conspiracy to commit vandalism, harassment. She also made sure our counterclaims grew teeth, claiming damages for construction delays, safety remediation, and emotional distress. Part of being a marine engineer is knowing how to anchor a structure against storms. I was learning that being a homeowner meant anchoring against people who thought sightlines were theirs to command. At dusk, when the deputies left and the site fell back into the careful quiet of a job still in progress, Luis handed me a thermos and said, "You good, boss?" I leaned on the railing and looked at the churning strip of ocean. "I'm fine," I lied, and then added, because it was true, "We're not done." The headline dropped like a sledgehammer onto Vista Azul's meticulously swept sidewalks. HOA demands ocean view be restored. Files lawsuit over neighbor's roof. It ran on the front page of the Monterey Coastal Sun, sandwiched between a photo of a sea otter rescue and a story about a budget overrun on the pier renovation. But mine was the story everyone read. Jenna made sure of that. She sent the press release, along with copies of the public filings and the arrest report, to every local journalist with a functioning inbox. The reporter who picked it up, a young woman named Mallory with a sharp wit and zero tolerance for suburban tyranny, called me the next day and asked if I'd like to go on record. I said yes. So did Luis. And Marco. And the guy from the cement supplier who witnessed Harry being led away in handcuffs. We were all tired of whispering. The article painted the situation exactly as it was. A retired marine engineer bought a hilltop home, followed every rule to legally build a small second floor, and was now being sued by a homeowner association that didn't even have jurisdiction over his property, all because their president lost her bathroom window view of the ocean. The photo they ran was of me standing next to my scaffolding, arms crossed, a seagull mid-scream in the background, like some kind of divine punctuation. Karen naturally lost her mind. 2 hours after the story went live, she posted a lengthy community clarification on the HOA's internal message board, accusing the Coastal Sun of journalistic defamation, me of coastal disruption, and the county of regulatory negligence. They Entire letter read like it had been written by a thesaurus under duress. She accused me of constructing a view-killing monolith and suggested my permits were obtained through back-channel manipulation, which, to be clear, was her elegant way of saying he followed the law and we don't like it. Jenna forwarded me the link with one line, "You're officially living rent-free in her head." And it didn't stop there. The next morning, someone spray-painted "View Thief" in red block letters across the temporary fence at the base of my driveway. A crude drawing of a house with angry eyes was scrawled next to it. Marco spotted it before I did and was already halfway through pressure washing when I came outside. "Probably just some HOA zealot," he muttered, scrubbing harder than necessary. "It'll come off. But damn, they've got crayons for brains." I filed a report with the sheriff's office anyway. They logged it as vandalism and took photos for the ongoing case. A deputy walked the slope but found no cameras or witnesses. No one saw anything, no one heard anything, but we both knew someone in Vista Azul had either done it or greenlit it. Jenna added the incident to our ever-growing complaint file. I was starting to feel like I needed a case manager, not an attorney. Meanwhile, construction limped forward. The delay caused by the sabotage had pushed us off schedule by almost 3 weeks. The glass panels for the second-floor enclosure had to be reordered due to transport timing, and every subcontractor I worked with now triple-checked their trucks for slashed tires or accidental material loss. One of them joked about adding a lookout tower. I wasn't laughing. Jenna filed our counterclaim formally that Friday morning. It was not a polite document. It named Karen Becker personally, as well as Vista Azul HOA as an entity, citing intentional infliction of emotional distress, criminal trespass, conspiracy to interfere with permitted construction, submission of falsified court documents, defamation, and finally punitive damages for the targeted harassment campaign. She also requested injunctive relief, barring the HOA from contacting me or interfering with the build in any way. And, just to twist the knife professionally, she attached all of Karen's public statements, social media posts, emails, and even that HOA newsletter from last year where Karen had bragged about keeping our hill pure and HOA compliant even when outsiders try to sneak in with their non-governed mindsets. I asked Jenna how strong our case was. She didn't look up from her laptop. I could win this in my sleep. By Saturday, a local news crew rolled up the hill in a van that looked like it hadn't passed emissions since the Obama administration. They set up on the public street just outside my property and filmed a short segment for the evening broadcast. The journalist, a calm-voiced guy in a windbreaker, asked me what message I had for the HOA. I paused, thought about it, then said, "I bought this property legally. I followed the rules. I don't think owning a view entitles anyone to own the sky." That quote ended up everywhere. Social media picked it up. A local HOA watchdog account posted a meme with my face and the phrase, "Own the home, not the horizon." It went modestly viral. Jenna sent me a text that just said, "You're trending." Karen is definitely screaming. But the thing that struck hardest came the next day. One of the HOA members, a quiet man named Arnold, who I'd seen gardening in khakis and tucked-in polo shirts, showed up at my front gate. He looked nervous, like a man delivering bad news to his mother-in-law. He handed me an envelope without a word and then walked away. Inside was a notarized affidavit. He stated that Karen had instructed the HOA board to find any possible infraction on my property and apply group pressure to delay construction. She had called my house an infected node and had encouraged members to do what must be done, quietly or otherwise. He wasn't the only one. By the end of the week, Jenna had 5 separate affidavits from current or former HOA members, all painting the same picture: a woman obsessed with control, determined to use every inch of gray area in the bylaws to punish me for daring to exist on her hillside. That's when Jenna made the move I didn't see coming. She held a press conference. Standing on the courthouse steps, flanked by folders, she read out the claims, named Karen directly, and announced the full scope of our civil lawsuit. Mallory from The Sun live tweeted the whole thing. And right as Jenna wrapped up, she smiled for the cameras and said, "This is what happens when people who think they own the rules meet someone who actually knows the law." Mic drop. I figured the firestorm would burn hot for a few days, maybe a week, then die down. But this wasn't just a fire, it was a controlled demolition, and every brick Karen had stacked over the years was now crumbling, one televised word at a time. The HOA board tried to hold a private meeting to clarify leadership direction, but one of the members leaked the agenda. It included a motion to temporarily suspend Karen's authority while the lawsuit proceeded. Karen, in response, declared the meeting illegitimate and threatened legal action against her own board. That same night, 3 of them resigned. I kept building. The second floor was finally sealed, and the framework for the glass balcony was up. I stood there one morning, coffee in hand, watching the waves roll in through fog just beginning to burn off. Below, Vista Azul looked like a model village. I could almost feel sorry for them. Almost. Then I saw the HOA van pull into Karen's driveway, and whatever sympathy I had dried up. The next blow came via certified mail. Karen, in one last desperate swing, had filed for a temporary restraining order, not against me, but against the construction itself. She argued that my project created visual distress to the community, posed mental health risks, and constituted a permanent environmental alteration inconsistent with community values. She filed it under a rarely used municipal clause designed for environmental hazard abatement. Basically, the same rule you'd use to halt someone from illegally dumping paint into a wetland. Jenna was livid. She drove straight to the county clerk's office, where the filing sat like a grenade in a manila folder, and lodged a formal complaint against both the claim and the lawyer who submitted it. Turns out, he'd been reprimanded 3 times in the past. 5 years for filing frivolous injunctions. She walked out with a date for an emergency hearing. I wasn't supposed to speak at that hearing, but when the judge asked if the owner of the allegedly hazardous structure was present, I stood. "Your Honor," I said, "this structure has permits, inspections, county approval, and a very nice view. The only thing it's hazardous to is Karen's entitlement." The courtroom chuckled. The judge did not. But she did deny the restraining order on the spot and warned Karen's lawyer that further abuse of the court's time would be sanctioned. We walked out of there with the wind at our backs. But then came the twist no one expected. A city council member reached out to me. He said he'd been watching the case closely, especially after the vandalism reports and press conference, and that Vista Azul HOA was now under municipal review for overreach, misuse of legal channels, and improper enforcement actions. Turns out, this wasn't the first time Karen had tangled with a neighbor outside their jurisdiction. It was just the first time someone had fought back hard enough to drag it into the light. The review triggered a public complaint window, meaning anyone who had been wronged by the HOA in the past 5 years could submit their grievances for review. Within days, the city received more than 30 complaints, everything from illegal fines to threats of utility shutoff, all traced back to Karen's presidency. Jenna moved fast. She amended our lawsuit to include a class action element representing not just me, but every homeowner Karen had threatened, fined, or extorted under false pretenses. Now it wasn't just my case. It was our case. Of course, Karen retaliated in the most Karen way possible. She hired a private investigator to try and dig up dirt on me. I only found out because the poor guy was caught snooping around my backyard pretending to be a pest control inspector. Marco cornered him, snapped a picture, and called the sheriff. When they searched his bag, they found HOA paperwork, a long lens camera, and a clipboard with aerial photos of my property printed from a drone, some of them clearly taken after Karen was ordered to stop interfering. We filed a police report for trespassing and unlawful surveillance. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my door. No envelope, typed anonymous. It read, "You can build your castle, but don't forget who owns the village below." I took a picture of it and gave it to Jenna. She didn't even blink. "We'll add it to the pile," she said. And I'll have the judge read it out loud in court. By now, the courtroom had turned into a second home. The county was fast-tracking our hearings due to the scope of the case and the sheer number of people involved. Each day brought another neighbor willing to testify. One woman, a retired nurse, tearfully described how Karen had fined her for having unauthorized flowers on her front lawn, wild daisies that had blown in from a county lot. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. She showed up to the next hearing without counsel. She tried to interrupt Jenna's opening statement and was silenced by the judge. When she finally got her turn to speak, she launched into a rant about property values, moral decay, and how people like me were ruining the cultural cohesion of Vista Azul. It was the wrong courtroom for that kind of speech. Jenna let her hang herself with her own words, then calmly submitted a packet of HOA emails showing Karen had orchestrated the trespass, greenlit the vandalism, and approved the unauthorized drone surveillance. The judge didn't just frown. She called a recess and returned with a bailiff who served Karen a criminal summons for harassment, fraud, and forgery. We walked out into a crowd of reporters, and this time it wasn't me they wanted a quote from. It was one of the other neighbors, a man I'd never met, who stepped up to the mic and said, "We should have stopped her years ago. Thank God someone finally did." Karen's downfall had momentum now. With the HOA under municipal review and neighbors lining up to testify, it felt like the tide had turned for good. Still, I didn't let my guard down. One morning, I found a hand-painted sign on my fence, "Locals only, no Sky Castle." Subtle, real welcoming. I installed more motion lights and made sure every camera had a fresh SD card. Meanwhile, the court date for the civil suit was set. Jenna compiled every incident, from the forged documents to the restraining order stunt. The DA's office, now involved after Karen's criminal summons, opened a parallel investigation. Our case had become a political headache for the city. As the second-floor deck neared completion, I got a call from a reporter. He'd uncovered old complaints against Vista Azul HOA, most ignored, but mine. It made noise. The headline the next day, "Monterey Man Fights HOA Empire to Reclaim His View." And under that, my face, coffee in hand, standing on the deck they tried to stop. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension as we filed in. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, face frozen in a brittle smile, flanked by her fake lawyer and the visibly exhausted HOA treasurer. I took my seat beside Jenna, who had a thick folder of exhibits and the calm focus of someone who already knew the outcome. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, opened with a request. Explain why this HOA believed it had authority over a parcel that, by all public record, existed completely outside their boundaries. Karen's lawyer tried to spin some nonsense about communal visual rights and implied governance, which the judge cut off with a single raised eyebrow. We presented the deed, the county boundary map, and the construction permits. Then came the fun part. Jenna played the security footage of the sabotage, showed the forged signatures, and read sworn affidavits from homeowners who'd never even heard of a vote. The courtroom shifted. Even Karen looked like she knew it was over. In her ruling, the judge didn't hold back. She declared my property entirely outside HOA jurisdiction, ruled that Karen's actions constituted harassment, document fraud, and criminal misrepresentation. She ordered full compensatory damages, $85,000 for construction delays, $30,000 for legal fees, and permanent injunctive relief, forbidding any HOA interference. But the hammer dropped when she referred the forgery charges to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Karen was arrested before she could leave the building. Weeks later, I stood on the finished upper deck of my house, the ocean wide and clear in front of me. I named the new studio Vista Libre, Free View. I took on my first client that same week, a local maritime restoration group that needed help designing a dock-resistant platform. A few of the HOA members, now former, stopped by to apologize. One brought me a pie and asked if I'd consider speaking at the next town council meeting about HOA reform. Another confessed that he'd voted for Karen because she scared us all. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I had the view, the house, and the story. And I had the last word too. The Monterey Herald ran it on the front page. He bought a house with a view and took down the HOA that tried to block the sky.